Hello, and welcome back to the Fellowship of Beer's best winter beer list. Let's see how many times in this video we can say the word beer. No, we won't do that. In previous videos, we've talked about why the Imperial Stout is such a fantastic beer for winter, and we've talked about the Doppelbock as well. In tonight's video, we're going to talk about something a little controversial. Controversial? Well, not really. It's the most popular style of beer in the world. It's a Pilsner Lager. You can't avoid Pilsner Lagers. When you're at parties, if you go around someone's house, this is the most common style of beer available in the whole world. If you're going to offer one up to someone to have a drink, try not to give them some macro awfulness like a Budweiser, and instead serve them up a Budweiser. These beers share the same name, they share the same branding colours, they share the same origin names of history, and they even share some of the similar slogans as well. King of Beers, Crown of Beers. But this is the authentic one. They call it Budvar Original. In North America and other places, it is labelled as Czechvar instead of Budweiser Budvar. And that's because of an ongoing legal battle that's been happening since the early 1900s. Wow, that's a long legal battle. Anyway, let's have a taste and we can talk about lager. There's loads of wonderful Czech lagers available from supermarkets these days, but if you can get them from an independent bottle shop, all the better. I ordered a fantastic one from the House of Trembling Madness recently. It was a beautiful beer, possibly one of the best Czech lagers I've ever tried, and I'll drop the name on the list. It pours a beautiful golden colour. It's got a lovely carbonation. On the nose, you get those lovely, ever so slight, delicate, floral, herbal, and that's from the Czech Sars hop. And that's one of the classic hops that we use in lagers. And even though they tend not to be put in towards the end of the boil of the beer, they retain a lot of those pleasant, mellow characteristics. Cheers. So what you would expect from a lager, it has a mineral quality from the water. It has a little tiny bit of malt sweetness to it, but nothing too complex that carries on the palate. It has that nice medium bitterness. It has the bubbles in there from the carbonation, and they're really important. I'm going to be talking about those in a bit for my chosen food pairing. And it's a very refreshing beer. Now, what this doesn't have compared to a lot of supermarket lagers that are available, a lot of macro lagers. In the craft beer world, when we refer to macro lager or macro beer, what we're talking about are the beers that are owned by the big boys, the naughty boys, owned by the likes of Anheuser-Busch, by Molson Coors, by Heineken. Those beers are created dependent to shareholders, and they are trying to create something that they can get out as fast as possible for the maximum amount of profit. For most of their brands, and there are exceptions, for most of their brands, they are all about making the money rather than living the life, living the story. And that's a shame, because they have such power and they have such resources to hand that they could use to make the best beer in the world, but they just choose not to. Now, that kind of macro industry can leave a very bad taste in the mouth, literally, because they cut corners in the processes, they cut corners in the ingredients, and they try to hide the poor creation of their beers behind triple filtering, behind mass industrial filtration through Kieselguhr and things like that, and which they then use as a selling point to say this beer was double filtered, this beer was triple filtered, to try and make you think it sounds more pure, it sounds better. Or they try to use other things like light. This is light, it's healthy for you, it's good for you, it's low calories. In reality, they've just used half the ingredients. They've used sugar, they've used sweet corn, they've used rice. And this is nothing new. If you're into beer, you know this. If you're not into beer, you probably know it as well. Now, that is a far cry away from the really good quality lagers that you can get from the Czech areas and from Germany, as well as from a lot of independent craft breweries. Even the most hardcore craft beer drinkers will say, they enjoy a good lager in the summer, and that's because they're a very refreshing beer. But for me, with an ABV of only 5% and under. These make great beers if you want to drink a few. They're beers you can quaff away at. They have a good flavour. You know, they don't taste watery. Personally, I think there's nothing better in the midst of winter having something that's been created through a cold process. I think those two things marry really well together. Something that's been lagered at really cold temperatures has been created. A beer that was designed literally in winter, was developed throughout a winter period, and to enjoy that in winter, you know, there's a nice parity there. So cheers. One of my favourite winter beers is a humble Czech Pilsner. We were talking about the different Budweisers and why they share the same name. Apologies, I'm not from the Czech Republic, and one thing I'm really good at on these videos is butchering other people's languages and pronunciation, and that's because I'm from the northeast of England, and half the time we don't know how to pronounce things in our own language. This beer originated in how the Germans would say Budweis, but in the Czech is České Budějovice. Comment below how I did out of 10 in the pronunciation of that. This beer was being sold, beer from České Budějovice was being sold into Germany, and it became quite popular, and they would call this beer Budweiser. They would say this was a Budweiser beer, this was a beer from the city of Budweis. Now, there were multiple breweries in Budweis, and they were all selling beer that was a Budweiser beer, but, you know, a beer from that city. When a visiting German from America, I believe, in the late 1800s, he really enjoyed the beer he was drinking, the Budweiser beer he was drinking, and when he went back to America, he started brewing beer of that name, whether it was a brand or a style descriptor or a beer name of origin. You know, there we have it. He started calling his beer a Budweiser and claimed he was following similar processes. Now, there were other later breweries, a German-speaking brewery in that area as well, in České Budějovice, in the German-speaking area, that started brewing a beer calling it Budweiser as well. The brewery which later then became nationalised by the Czech Republic, which is this brewery, they were calling their beer Budweiser. They were in conflict with this pre-World War II, and just before the occupation of what was Czechoslovakia at the time by the German forces, they were in talks with who later became Anheuser-Busch, which later became AB InBev, which are one of the biggest drinks owners in the world, about giving them this name. The agreement was never signed, and when this brewery became state-owned, they've kind of been fighting over who can call their beer Budweiser ever since. Now, in a twist in the 1990s, AB InBev, Anheuser-Busch InBev, who own Budweiser, American Budweiser, they actually ended up buying the German-speaking brewery that was calling their beer Budweiser to add to their claim of who can call their beer Budweiser. It's an interesting story. It's convoluted, but it does explain why these beers have the same name and why they have the same branding. What it doesn't explain is which one tastes nice, and that's obviously this one and not this one. I'll pick it up now. Now, because this Pilsner is such a refreshing beer, it's also quite delicate. And when we're talking about beer and food pairings, we talk about flavours which can compare to each other, flavours which can contrast with each other, things that can bring opposites, and we've talked about previously. But one thing we haven't mentioned before, and this is really important when it comes to matching a beer with a food, is matching the intensity of the flavour. So you would not be pairing this against a venison stew, because venison is a very rich, strong flavour. So what you want to be pairing a lager with is something that is reasonably delicate in flavour itself. One of my favourite pairings is quite straight up simple pizza, a margarita pizza, because you don't have too many strong flavours there. You've got the flavour of bread, a little bit of salt, minor grain flavours. You have like a really mellow tomato, and then you have a very mild cheese. Salt against the beer, they work really well together. The refreshing qualities of the lager clean the palate, ready for the pizza. So that's a really good basic one. Because we're in party season, one of the things I made to pair this beer with is based off something I used to cook in a Turkish restaurant in Sydney many moons ago, which in Sydney was called a Zucchini Fritter. And basically what it is courgette grated up with any other vegetables you want, usually potato, carrot, onion, but you could put anything in there really. And then this is the moisture is squeezed out of these vegetables, much like you would when you were making a really good quality hash brown. And then the binding agent for this, you know, you would expect if you're making a hash brown, you would use egg yolk, and the binding agent for this is cheese. I used a medium flavoured red Leicester, a little bit of a mild cheddar, and you could use any mild, not overpowering cheese with this. And then this is mixed with flour, and the cheese, just as you stir it in, acts as the binding agent to stick it all together. Squeezing out that moisture is really important, because it allows it to stick together and not go too claggy. The flavourings in there are just really basic ones, because this is quite often cooked as like a breakfast item. It's just like salt, white pepper, and a tiny bit of Dijon mustard. So really basic, nothing too intense flavour-wise at all. These are then formed into little patties, and they can be deep fried or shallow fried. And what you're looking for is you're looking for them to be cooked inside, but just crisped and browning on either side. So they should crack open, so they should have a crisp cracked open, and they should be moist inside. And the moisture inside is from the cheese, and you have that gooey quality of the melted cheese, and it keeps the vegetables nice and soft inside. So it makes a really good vegetarian burger alternative if you cook a large one in a big patty. This is just served up very simply with our own in-house steam machine vinegar that our chef has cooked, and he prepares this and uses it a lot in the cooking of barbecue sauces. And this was made with a pale ale, this vinegar. So it's a pale ale vinegar, and just a dash, you know, of any malt vinegar just adds a little bit of acidity. And so you do not have strong flavours there. Touch of acidity from the vinegar, a little bit of saltiness from the sea salt, a little bit of pepperiness, and then you have the mild, gentle flavours of the vegetables. It's a dead easy thing to make up for breakfasts, or you know, you can use it as nibbles, you can eat them cold, or you can serve it out as part of a hot buffet. The reason I was talking about the bubbles earlier as an important part of this pairing is because this is an oily thing. This has been cooked in fat, if it's deep fried or shallow fried, and a great way to clean that oil from your palate, and this is an advantage beer has compared to most wines, is that it has a sparkle. The carbon dioxide that is dissolved in this beer cleans the whole of your mouth. Not just refreshing because of the flavour, but the bubbles literally scour the lipids from your taste receptors in your mouth, which means that you're ready to eat the next morsel and you can appreciate it all over again. Which is another reason this tends to work really well with pizza, from the oiliness from the cheese, or whether it's a deep pan pizza cooked in a bit of oil. So, winter beers, if you're a beer lover, I bet you weren't quite expecting that one. If you're not a beer lover, I bet you weren't expecting someone on a beer education channel to be talking about their top favourite winter beers, for it to be a Pilsner Lager. I love Pilsner Lagers, it's no secret. So join us again as we talk about further winter beers, and we start introducing a couple of hearty winter dishes, as well as some yummy festive treats as well. Thank you for following us. Like the video, comment on it. It obviously helps with our engagement and gets it to more people, and helps us create more free, interesting content like this. Whatever you're doing this season, I hope you manage to have a decent lager. Thank you very much. Cheers for watching.